Om. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatam Chaiva Tato Jayamudirayeta. Om. Good. Welcome to our webcast of my usual Saturday morning class. 3 months ago, when we stopped operations and classes here at our ashram, following this class was interrupted at that time also. At that time, we started uploading classes. I would still teach the class and record the class, and then upload the video to our, upload the audio recording, to our website, along with the text, so that our ongoing students could follow. Now we finally have our live streaming hardware and software in place, and going forward we will now live stream the remaining classes of our Mahabharata text. We're coming near the end. I should mention that all this technology is very new. We have a new computer, we have new software, new hardware, and I'm a little nervous about whether or not it'll keep working correctly. Anything new can do unexpected things, and that's happened several times. So if something doesn't work properly, I hope you will be understanding, forgive us. We'll do the best we can. I'm looking over here nervously, and let me get ready here. So we continue our study of the Ashrama Parva, where we left off. By the way, as a matter of general introduction, notice that we are in the 15th book of the Mahabharata. The final books have very little Vedantic teachings in them, and since our focus is mostly on Vedantic teachings, we'll be going through these sections quite quickly. Today we will finish the Ashrama Parva and begin the Mausala Parva. There's nothing of Vedantic interest at all in the Mahaprasthanika Parva, the penultimate book, and then we'll see portions of the Swargarohana Parva, the final part of the Mahabharata. We maybe have just 3-4 classes left, so we're at the very end after 5 years of study. So it's been a very wonderful study. And with our concluding class, I'll make some general comments about the Mahabharata and our study of the Mahabharata. So to come to our text in the Ashrama Parva, this is 15 years. The time setting is 15 years after the war has concluded. The Pandavas, of course, are victorious, living in their palace, along with Dhritarashtra, the former king, who has been living there with Yudhishthira and the others, and they've grown quite fond of each other. Yudhishthira is very respectful and kind to Dhritarashtra. Victors aren't always kind and respectful of those they conquer, but in this case, the new king, Yudhishthira, is very kind and helpful for the aging former king Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra has also grown very fond of the Pandavas. In fact, in a prior class, he said he's more fond of the Pandavas now than of his own sons. Of course, his own sons were rather difficult, so perhaps we can understand why. In these 15 years after the war, Dhritarashtra has been just guilt-stricken. He feels so remorseful. He feels so guilty. In general, he feels guilty for allowing that terrible, bloody war to take place. But more specifically, he feels guilty because he set up the circumstances for his eldest and favorite son, Duryodhana, to be killed. So he holds himself directly responsible, not just for all the death and carnage in general, but in particular, he holds himself responsible for the death of his son Duryodhana. And for these 15 years, he's been engaged in tapasya. Expiation is the English word, prayashchitta in Sanskrit, which means prayers and rituals and austerities to erase, to some extent, the bad karma he's accumulated through his mistakes in allowing the war to take place and in allowing all the carnage and especially the death of his son Duryodhana. After 15 years of intense austerities, he feels it hasn't been sufficient. He's still guilt-ridden after these 15 years. And in our prior class, we saw where he spoke to Yudhishthira, very heartfelt discussion with Yudhishthira, in which he poured out his heart and said he's been trying so hard to do this tapas. He wants, excuse me, he wants to leave the palace, retire to the forest, to devote himself even more intensely to his austerities. And Yudhishthira is very surprised by this. First of all, Yudhishthira didn't know that Dhritarashtra was doing such intense tapasya. Also, because of his fondness, Yudhishthira doesn't want the old king to leave the palace. So he tries to dissuade Dhritarashtra from leaving the palace. And Dhritarashtra, we saw there's a very dramatic scene in our prior class. At one point, Dhritarashtra faints, and everyone feels like, oh, maybe he's just died. Fortunately, he didn't die. He regained his consciousness. And a little while later, Vyasa, the great rishi and author of the Mahabharata, who was visiting the palace, he interceded and directed Yudhishthira to allow King Dhritarashtra to leave the palace, retire to the forest, and live a life of intense austerities. That's where we left off our prior class, and we continue today with this very dramatic and moving scene, where Dhritarashtra leaves the palace. Apparently it had been announced in advance that Dhritarashtra was leaving, and people came not just from all over the kingdom, people came from other kingdoms as well to pay their final homage to to the former king Dhritarashtra and to see him off. That's what we'll see here. Tato nishkramya nripatis, tato nishkramya nripatis, tasmadantah puratara, tasmadantah puratara, samavetanshatan sarvan, samavetanshatan sarvan, paurajana padanata, paurajana padanata. Tataha, then, Nripatihi, the king, Dhritarashtra, Nishkramya, having left, leaving tasmat, from that, from what? Antapurat, from his inner apartment. So, King Dhritarashtra coming out from his apartment, leaving his apartment, tada, then, Samavetan shatan sarvan, tan, all of them, sarvan, all of them. Samavetan, who had assembled to see him off. Who had assembled to see him off? Paurajan, the people of their kingdom, Hastinapura, and Aparan Ata. Aparan means people not of their kingdom, people from nearby kingdoms. They had all gathered there, and they see King Dhritarashtra leaving his apartment, and Brahmanascha Mahipalan, Brahmanascha Mahipalan, Nana Desha Samagatan, Nana Desha Samagatan, Tatah Praha Mahateja, Tatah Praha Mahateja, Dhritarashtro Mahipatihi, Dhritarashtro Mahipatihi. So who were those assembled to see him off? It says in the first half of this verse, they included Brahmanaha, priests, brahmanas, and Mahipalan, kings, kings from nearby kingdoms. By the way, the word for king, almost all, not all, but many of the words for king, like this one, mean protector. Mahi is earth, pala, palana, palaka, protector. The one who protects is the king. That's, in ancient times, the king's first and foremost priority, responsibility, was to protect the people of the kingdom. I'm smiling now at the irony. If only our modern generations of leaders had as their first priority to protect the people, what we see too often is the first priority is to get reelected. And that's a shame. You know that. Anyway, let me not get off on a tangent of politics. So who had assembled to bid farewell to Dhritarashtra included Brahmanaha, the priests, brahmanas, Mahipalan, kings from nearby kingdoms, from Nana Desha Samagatan, those who were Samagatan, who had gathered Nana Desha, from many different places, from many different kingdoms. Tataha, thereafter, after Dhritarashtra had left his apartment and seen all of the people assembled to wish him farewell, Mahatejaha, that great, glorious former king, Dhritarashtra, it says in the second line, Dhritarashtra, that Mahipatihi, that king, the former king Dhritarashtra, he praha, he said. So he spoke to the assembled people. And here we listen now to his final words. Very moving. If you reflect on the entire arc of the story of the Mahabharata and how much Dhritarashtra struggled. You caught, in American English, caught between a rock and a hard place, because King Dhritarashtra knew what is dharma, but his evil-minded son Duryodhana kept pulling him to the position of adharma. So King Dhritarashtra was extraordinarily conflicted. His blindness, of course, is not only a physical reality, but also symbolic of his inability to see what's going on and really understand clearly and respond properly to what's going on. So we hear now King Dhritarashtra's final words. Dhritarashtra Dhritarashtra Shantanu palayamasa Shantanu palayamasa Yathavat prativimimam Yathavat prativimimam Tata vichitra viryascha Tata vichitra viryascha Bhishmena paripalitaha Bhishmena paripalitaha. So here he recounts the lineage of kings that had preceded him. beginning with King Shantanu. So going way back, and that's where you might remember that the whole of the Mahabharata in the Adi Parva, the very first book, begins with the story of King Shantanu and Ganga. We won't return to all of that. So at that time, long ago, so 2 or 3 generations ago, Shantanu, the King Shantanu, Palayamasa, he ruled. Literally, he protected, but the contextually means he ruled. He ruled what? Prithivim imam. Imam, this Prithivim, this earth, this region, this kingdom. So long ago, King Shantanu ruled this kingdom, Yathavat, and just as King Shantanu ruled, Tata, in the same way, his successor, King Shantanu's successor, was his son Vichitraviryaha. So Vichitravirya ruled. You might remember that story is quite complicated. So he first bore 8 children with Ganga as his wife, the 8th of which was Bhishma, and Ganga later withdrew, and then Shantanu later married Satyavati, Queen Satyavati, and through Satyavati, Vichitravirya was born. So Vichitravirya and Bhishma, I guess we would say, were half-brothers. And after King Shantanu died, Vichitravirya ruled the kingdom until he died, along with Bhishma, having Bhishma's support. Remember, in that complicated story, Bhishma had made a vow not to become king, but to support whoever was king. You can go back and review those earliest parts of the story. Then, Yatha cha pandu bhrata me, Yatha cha pandu bhrata me, Daito bhavatam abhuta, Daito bhavatam abhuta, Sachapi palayamasa, Sachapi palayamasa, Yathavatachavetaha, Yathavatachavetaha. Yatha, and in the same way as Shantanu ruled and Vichitravirya ruled, then who ruled next was me brata, my brother. Dhritarashtra is speaking here. Who was his brother? Pandu. Pandu. His brother ruled next after the death of Vichitravirya, who was Daitaha abhut. He was very much beloved, bhavatam, by all of you. Remember, Dhritarashtra here is addressing all of the people gathered to bid him farewell. And he says that Pandu was very, very dear to all who were assembled, because now we've come to their lifetime. So King Shantanu was ancient history, so to speak, even Vichitravirya, but everyone gathered there knew King Pandu and was very fond of King Pandu. Pandu hu saha, he, King Pandu, saha cha api, also he, palayamasa, he also ruled. Again, the literal meaning of the word is he protected, but we translate it as he ruled. Sahacha api palayamasa, he also ruled, yatavat, in that same way, tatcha vetaha, vetaha, as you know. Tatcha, that also, vetaha, you know that very well. You were all there at the time of Pandu. Then, Maya cha bhavatam samyaka, Maya cha bhavatam samyaka, Chushrushaya kritanaghaha, Chushrushaya kritanaghaha, Asamyagva mahabhagas, asamyagva mahabhagas. There's a typo here in the Sanskrit. The first syllable is wrong. It begins tat. Tat kshantavyamatandratayihi. Tat kshantavyamatandratayihi. So he's gone through the lineage, starting with Shantanu, Vichitravirya, Pandu, and after Pandu died, and long complicated stories. Remember the curse when Pandu killed the deer was actually a rishi. Anyway, we won't go through all these stories. Very intricate, elaborate stories. You can go back and study that on your own. So after King Pandu died, then Dhritarashtra became the next king. And he says, Maya cha, and by me also, bhavatam, for all of you, there was, and the word here gets corrupted by grammar rules of Sandhi. The word in the second line is shushrusha. It becomes chu due to some grammar rules of Sandhi. Shushrusha you might know to mean service. And service here means he is saying that by me also, service as being your king was done bhavatam, for all of you. So by me also, the service of ruling, the service of protecting was done by me, all of you. Samyak, it was done properly by me. And kritanaghaha, he's addressing all the people assembled there, all of you sinless ones. Krita anaghaha, the ones who had never done any sin, all of you good people. So by me also, the responsibility of ruling and protecting was undertaken. Ya shushrusha, and that service of ruling that was done by me, samyak, back up a line, which was done well, now go down a line, asamyakva. It might have been done well, or it might not have been done so well. And here King Dhritarashtra is admitting that maybe he made some mistakes as king. He made terrible mistakes. Of course, every ruler makes mistakes. There's never been a president of this country or a prime minister of India who hasn't made major blunders. And Dhritarashtra certainly made his share of blunders. And he admits it here, which is quite a good quality, because sometimes great men are full of pride and unwilling to admit their shortcomings. Here, Dhritarashtra was a great man, and maybe he had some pride, but at least here he's humble enough to admit that Yashushrusha, that service of ruling that he completed, samyak asamyakva, whether it was good samyak or asamyakva, or when it wasn't so good, when it wasn't done so properly. Mahabhagaha, again, he's addressing everyone assembled there, all you noble people, whether it was done well or whether my service was not done well, for those things which were not done well, tat kshantavyam, tat, that, kshantavyam, should be forgiven. So he's asking for forgiveness for the mistakes, I'll paraphrase, for the mistakes I made during my rule, please forgive me for those mistakes. Tat kshantavyam, my mistakes are to be forgiven. Atandrataihi, with open hearts, with full hearts. So very moving. I find this very moving, that he should admit his mistakes and ask for forgiveness. Then, avashyam eva vaktavyam, avashyam eva vaktavyam, iti kritva kritva bravimivaha, iti kritva bravimivaha, Yudhisthiro Mahateja, Yudhisthiro Mahateja, Bhavata Palayashyati, Bhavata Palayashyati. Avashyam eva vaktavyam. Vaktavyam, what needs to be said. Avashyam, what certainly needs to be said. Eva, indeed. Iti kritva is now complete. Having said what needs to be said, iti kritva, having said this much, bravimi vaha. Now, bravimi, now I say, vaha unto you. I don't like my translation here. I have said to you, it's really having said this much to you, bravimi vaha, now I say to you, so you can correct my translation, now I say to you, Yudhisthiraha. So after King Dhritarashtra was removed from rulership after the war, now who becomes king? Yudhisthiraha. Who is Mahatejaha, who is extraordinarily brilliant, glorious. He, Palayashyati, he will rule. Again, it literally means he will protect. Bhavataha, all of you. He will rule all of you. He will protect all of you. He is the next king in this lineage, from Shantanu to Vichitravirya to Pandu, Dhritarashtra, and finally to Yudhishthira. Now, to conclude the chapter. It yuktastena te rajña, it yuktastena te rajña, paurajanapada janaha, paurajanapada janaha, no churbhashpakala kinchata, no churbhashpakala kinchata, vikshan chakru parasparam, vikshan chakru parasparam. The final verse in this chapter. Iti uktaha, talking about all the people assembled there. Iti uktaha, uktaha being addressed. Iti, thus, having been thus addressed, te, they, all of those assembled being addressed, tena, by him, by whom? Rajña, by the king, by Dhritarashtra. And who were they who were addressed by the king? Paurajan, the people of the Puri, the people of the city, Hastinapura, and Apadajanaha, and people from outside of the city, and even people from outside of the kingdom, all of them having been addressed, having heard Dhritarashtra's final words before he leaves to the forest, what was their response? And here it's described, I think, in a very remarkable way. What was their response? First of all, they were bhashpa kalaha. Their eyes were filled with bhashpa. Here means tears, has other meanings. Here it means tears. They were teary-eyed, and na, that the first word is na uchuhu. We have to break the words apart. And the na goes to kinchit, na kinchit, nothing. Uchuhu, they said. They could say nothing. They were speechless. Tears flowing from their eyes, and they were speechless at the conclusion of King Dhritarashtra's final words. And what did they do? They just stood there, chakruhu. They just stayed there, viksham, looking, parasparam, mutually. They just stood there looking at each other. The English word we would use here is they were dumbfounded. They just couldn't grasp the fact that King Dhritarashtra, who had difficulties in his kingship, but the people who had assembled to bid him farewell had so much love in their hearts for him. They couldn't fathom the fact that he was about to leave them forever, go off to the forest to pray and meditate and to die. Dhritarashtra being quite elderly at this point, and everyone understood that perfectly, and as I said, they were just dumbfounded by that. Not a lot of Vedanta here, as I said, for the reasons I said before. We've come to the very end of the entire Mahabharata. But something to reflect on here is we have just listened to King Dhritarashtra's final words, reflecting on the kings who had preceded him, reflecting on Yudhishthira, the king who follows him, and reflecting on his own life and the mistakes he made when he was king. So all of this was reflected upon and commented upon in his final words. So for us, here's an interesting question. What will be your final words? We just heard Dhritarashtra's final words before he left. What will be your final words before you leave this life? What will you say to your family, to your friends, colleagues, to members of society, when at the end of your life you reflect on what happened before, what happened later, what happened in the middle? You reflect on the whole span of your life, and you'll reflect, of course, on the good things you accomplished, and you may also reflect on some mistakes you made in your life. So with that kind of reflection on the entire span of your life, at the end, in your final days, before you die, before you leave this life, what will be your final words? This is a really, really important reflection. In fact, once a year, I think in the first meditation of each year that we perform here, guided meditation, is a reflection on our entire lives. And the reason for that reflection that we do in a guided meditation is the fact that we live sometimes very stressful lives, lives where we're responding to urgent situations, problems, even catastrophes. And the problem, and what happens, is when we're confronted with all these intense issues, our attention becomes narrowly focused on the problem we're confronting. There's nothing wrong. Of course, the problem we're confronting needs our full attention, but the difficulty here is when our attention is again and again narrowly focused on individual problems that we face, sometimes our attention becomes so narrowly focused on the present moment that we fail to appreciate the bigger picture of our life, the span of our life. We lose perspective when we're so focused. The metaphor that's used, some of you know this metaphor used in the business world. In business, the various problems that arise and dealing with those various problems, in the business world they speak of putting out fires. A problem that arises in a business place is like a fire, and then all the employees have to rush to put out that fire and solve that problem. And in the business world, they speak of the fact that when you're so busy putting out fires, you can't work for the purpose of what that business is about. You're so busy putting out fires, the real purpose of that business is set aside. And this happens to us in life. We get so caught up in the intensity of what's happening each moment, and there's plenty of challenges to make each moment intense and to draw our attention. But the problem is, the danger is that our attention then becomes so narrowly focused, this tunnel vision, as we call it. Because of that tunnel vision, we fail to see the bigger scope of our life, the span of our life. And when we lose sight of the span of our life, we lose perspective on the meaning and purpose of life. We're so focused on solving the problem in front of us that we forget what our life is really about. So perhaps in Dhritarashtra's final words here, where he reflects on the lineage of kings and his role, his reign as king, and he reflects on the good things he accomplished and the mistakes he made, just as Dhritarashtra reflects in that way, in a very meaningful way. Perhaps the message for us all is to reflect on our whole life. You don't have to wait until your last days to do that reflection. In fact, what a shame it is if you wait until then, because there are many things you could have done differently. So that meditation we conduct, and I think that meditation is on our website. You can find that guided meditation. Might be called year-end reflection or something like that. That particular guided meditation can help us to reflect on the entire span of our life, to make sure that we've got our priorities straight, that we're devoting ourselves to what's really important in life and not getting caught up in the minutiae and the details of moment-to-moment life. So, some comments on Dhritarashtra's final words. And with that, we come to the end of the Ashrama Parva, also called Ashrama Vasika Parva, which took place 15 years after the war. Now we come to the Mausala Parva, which takes place 36 years after the war took place. So we just finished 15 years after the war. Now we've jumped ahead another, 21 years into the future. And the story of the Mahabharata is really intricate and complex. And we need a little bit of the background. So let me just give you a little background here before we see this section from the Mausala Parva. Mausala, by the way, is a reference to these iron rods which were used as weapons. That's the meaning of Mausala in this context. Mausala means iron rods. And I'll explain in just a moment the role of these iron rods in wrecking destruction once again. At the end of the war, Gandhari, the wife, excuse me, the wife of King Dhritarashtra, she was so angry at Lord Krishna at the end of the war because she felt in her heart that Sri Krishna could have prevented the war from taking place, and Sri Krishna could have prevented her son Duryodhana from being killed. So she was so angry. She was devoted to Sri Krishna, and she recognized he had the power as an avatara, as an incarnation of God. Gandhari knew that Krishna could have stopped the war. As a side issue, he didn't stop the war because this is the unfoldment of karma. We've had this discussion many times. We've discussed how the God of the cosmos is not a human being with human will. So it is God's will that our karmas should bear their fruits. That's the best way of understanding God's will. And due to the deeds of the Pandavas and Kauravas, it was the effect of the deeds they themselves committed that culminated in the events of the war. So Sri Krishna allowed karma to unfold according to the laws of nature, laws of karma. But that's not very soothing for Gandhari, who was very angry at Sri Krishna, blamed him, and she cursed. Gandhari cursed Krishna and his clan, his family, his kingdom, Yadava. Yadava was the name of his family, his clan, lineage. So Gandhari cursed Sri Krishna and the Yadavas to undergo the same kind of disaster that her family, the Kauravas, had undergone. Kauravas were wiped out by the war. So her curse was that Sri Krishna and the Yadavas should also be wiped out by warfare. And that curse proved to be true in this Mausala Parva. Anyway, the way that curse unfolded in the story is that in the kingdom of Sri Krishna had gone back to Dwaraka. Remember, Dwaraka was the name of Sri Krishna's kingdom. And maybe due to Gandhari's curse, people's minds began to become distorted. They lost their value for dharma, for righteousness, and basically the society began to crumble. People behaved improperly, immorally. The society was crumbling. The society in Dwaraka, Krishna's kingdom, all of the Yadavas. And the story goes, actually we'll see details I'll hold off on for just a few minutes. Actually, I'll give the story. They're complicated stories. Anyway, so when everyone was misbehaving, there was a group of rishis, great rishis, including Narada and Durvasa and Vasishta. These great Brahmana rishis had come to visit Dwaraka, and people were misbehaving. Even Sri Krishna's son named Samba. So Samba, the son of Sri Krishna, was also misbehaving and kind of irritated these great rishis. So because of Samba's misbehavior, the rishis gave another curse. So first of all, Gandhari's curse caused the Yadavas to become corrupted. Their societies began to crumble. And then when these great rishis came to visit, because of the corrupted behavior of the people in general, and Krishna's son in particular, these rishis got very angry, and they made a further curse on the Yadavas. And as a result of the curse of these great rishis, very strange. The curse allowed a certain kind of grass to be turned into an iron rod. A lot of grass was growing, long grass. So these long blades of grass were transformed into iron rods called Mausala. And all of the Yadavas picked up these iron rods and they fought amongst each other. This is as a result of the curse of the rishis. They fought amongst each other, and through this civil war of sorts, they wiped themselves out. They killed each other off. And the whole, everything just crumbled. The people died. Balarama dies. Sri Krishna dies. A long story about how Sri Krishna dies. Another curse involved, all of its complexity. Gandhari's curse involved. And finally, Dwaraka sinks into the ocean, and all the men have killed themselves off. All the women need to be rescued. Arjuna goes to, by the way, this is almost over. I'm recounting this whole Mausala Parva. Arjuna goes to rescue the women who are remaining after Dwaraka sinks into the ocean, and Arjuna is gathered them together and taking them back to Hastinapura to protect them, and en route they're attacked by thieves and thugs, and Arjuna, the great warrior, then rises up against these thieves, and Arjuna finds that none of his celestial weapons will work anymore. So another story, he was given these weapons, I believe, by Indra, and all these weapons failed. More effects of a curse, effects of karma. And because Arjuna didn't have access to these celestial weapons, he was unable to defeat these thieves, and the thieves carried off the women of who had escaped from Dwaraka. So at this point, Arjuna is so incredibly depressed. First of all, Krishna has died, his best friend, and of course much more than a friend. And not only has Krishna died, Arjuna has just suffered perhaps his greatest defeat in a battlefield, where Arjuna was unable to defeat these thieves, and these thieves kidnapped the women that he was trying so hard to protect. Anyways, long introduction, but we need to understand the story to understand why it is that Arjuna is so incredibly depressed. And that's how this final section, by the way, we're seeing the final part of the Mausala Parva. Arjuna is incredibly depressed, and in the outer story, the Rishi Vaishampayana, the disciple of Vyasa, is narrating all of this to King Janamejaya. So in the outer story, Rishi Vaishampayana narrates, Vaishampayana vacha, Vaishampayana vacha, Pravishan Arjuno Rajan, Pravishan Arjuno Rajan, Ashramam Satyavadinaha, Ashramam Satyavadinaha, Dadarshasina Mekante, Dadarshasina Mekante, Munim Satyavati Sutam, Munim Satyavati Sutam. Rishi Vaishampayana narrates this. Rajan, O king, he addresses King Janamejaya. Arjuna, you see in the middle of the first line, Pravishan, entering. Entering where? Ashramam, the ashrama, the hermitage. The hermitage of whom? Satyavadinaha, of the one who always speaks truth. We learn in a moment that it's Vyasa's ashrama. So Arjuna, having suffered, having lost his friend Lord Krishna, having suffered this terrible loss at the hands of the thieves, having failed to protect all these ladies, Arjuna arrives on his way back to Hastinapur. He arrives at the ashram of Vyasa, and Dadarsha, he saw. He saw, in the second line, Munim, that sage. What sage? Satyavati Sutam, the son of Satyavati, another complicated story, Satyavati and the Rishi Parashara. You can look up that story. So he found, Arjuna Dadarsha, he saw Munim, the sage Vyasa, Satyavati Sutam, the son of Satyavati. Arjuna saw Vyasa asinam, seated in the third line. Seated ekante, alone. So Arjuna, returning from this horrible tragedy, comes to the ashram of Vyasa and finds Vyasa seated there alone. Nirvinna manasam drishtva, nirvinna manasam drishtva, partam Vyaso bravidadam, partam Vyaso bravidadam, natva pratyabhijanami, natva pratyabhijanami, kimidam bharatarshabha, Kimidam Bharatarshabha. Vyasa, Drishtva, having seen whom? In the second line, Partha, Arjuna. Vyasa, in fact, Vyasa's name is in the second line. So Vyasa, having seen Partha, having seen Arjuna, Arjuna who was nirvinna manasam. Arjuna is one whose manas, whose mind is nirvinna, depressed, extremely depressed. Vyasa, seeing how depressed Arjuna was, abravit, he said, Vyasa said, idam. Vyasa said this to Arjuna. What did Vyasa say? Twa, you, Arjuna, na pratyabhijanami. I don't recognize you. In English, we'd say, I hardly recognize you. You look so different. Why? Because of that depression. Vyasa has never seen Arjuna looking so depressed, so dejected. Of course, Arjuna has been sad and depressed and dejected. You remember the opening portions of the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna was so sad and depressed, and Sri Krishna was there to offer him advice. So we have a similar situation here. Arjuna being once again sad and depressed, having undergone this terrible tragedy, and he turns to Vyasa for help, for guidance and support. And Vyasa looks at Arjuna, sees how depressed he is, and says, Natva pratyabhijanami, I hardly recognize you, Arjuna. You are so depressed. Kimidam, what is this? What happened? Bharatarshabha, O mighty one, O Arjuna, what happened? He asks. Arjuna responds. Arjuna uvacha, yasa medhava pushriman, yasa medhava pushriman, prahat pankajalochanaha, sakrishna saharamena, tyaktva deham divam gataha, Starting the third line, Arjuna is explaining why he's so depressed. First of all, Saha Krishnaha, that Krishna, my beloved friend Krishna. And look at the top, the first half of the verse. Arjuna is describing Lord Krishna with these flowing words. He says, Krishna is Yaha Saha. He's the one who Megha Vapuhu, whose vapus, whose body was Megha, like a dark cloud. So that dark-skinned Lord Krishna, who is Shriman, the very blessed one, Sri Krishna, who was Brihad Pankaja Lochanaha. Sri Krishna, whose lochanas, whose eyes, were like Brihad Pankaja, were like large lotus leaves or flowers. So Sri Krishna's eyes were like the petals of large lotus flowers. So with this very flowery language, Arjuna is expressing his deep love for Sri Krishna. And back in the third line, Saha Krishnaha, that Krishna, who I love so much, Saha Ramena, along with Rama. Now be careful here. Rama is not Lord Rama. As you know, here Rama refers to Balarama. So, Balarama, and again, complicated story. Anyway, Balarama, who's also an avatara, along with Sri Krishna, dwelling in Dwaraka. What did they do? Tyaktva. They gave up Sri Krishna along with Balarama. Tyaktva, having given up Deham, having given up the body, having died. Divam gataha. Sri Krishna went to Divam, heaven. Sri Krishna gave up his body and went to heaven. Arjuna continues. Mausale Vrishni Viranam, Mausale Vrishni Viranam, Vinasho Brahma Shapajaha, Vinasho Brahma Shapajaha, Yete Shura Mahatmanaha, Yete Shura Mahatmanaha, Simhadarpa Mahabalaha, Simhadarpa Mahabalaha. So, Arjuna is explaining his depression. His beloved friend Sri Krishna has died, Balrama has died, and not only that, Mausale, in that battle of iron rods in which all the Yadavas, the Yadava warriors of Sri Krishna's clan, they all killed each other. He says, Mausale, in that battle fought with iron rods, there was vinashaha, in the second line, the destruction, the total destruction, vrishni viranam, vira, the mighty ones, who were vrishni. Vrishni is another name for Yadava. Vrishni was a famous Yadava king. So the Yadavas are also called Vrishnis for that reason. So Vrishni Vira, the mighty ones of the Yadava clan, na vinashaha, there was a total destruction of them all in that battle with the iron rods in which they killed each other. And why would they do that? Brahma shapa jaha, due to the shapa, due to the curse of the Brahmana, and Brahmana here refers to those rishis who had visited Dwaraka and who were so badly treated by the people there, whose behavior was corrupted. So here Arjuna continues to lament. He's lamented the loss of his beloved Sri Krishna and Balrama. Now he laments the loss of the entire Yadava clan. Yete, all of them, Shuraha, all of them who were so Shura, fierce, ferocious, mighty, Mahatmanaha, great men, great warriors, Simhadarpaha, they were as bold as lions. Nice expression. Simhadarpaha, as bold as lions, and Mahabalaha, extremely mighty. Arjuna is lamenting all of them. We'll see just one more verse. Punaf punarnam rashyami, punaf punarnam rashyami, vinashamamitaujasam, vinashamamitaujasam, chintayano yadunancha, chintayano yadunancha, krishnasya cha yashasvinaha, krishnasya cha yashasvinaha. Punaha, punaha, again and again, na mrishyami. And there's a problem here, two problems. One is my translation is wrong. Second is mrishyami, I think has to be with the other sha. This sha means to think, mrishyami, but I think it's supposed to be the other sha, na mrishyami, which means I cannot forgive. I think there's a problem. My translation is wrong, and there's a problem also with the text. Punaf punaha, again and again, na mrishyami, I cannot forgive. I can't get over, as we would say in American English, vinasham, the destruction, the slaughter, amita aujasam, of those warriors whose ojas, power, might, and strength was amita, limitless. It's a very fancy way of referring to warriors as amita ojas, those whose might was limitless. So Sri Krishna continues to lament here. Again and again, I think about it, and I cannot forgive, I cannot get over the destruction of all those mighty warriors. Chintayanaha, he says, I go on thinking again and again. Yadunam, about those Yadus, or the Yadavas, Sri Krishna's clan, and Krishnasya cha. And I go on thinking again and again of Sri Krishna, Yashaswanaha, the glorious one. So Arjuna is immersed in his sorrow, thinking again and again of the terrible destruction of the Yadavas, the clan he was very dear to, and of course, very depressed because of the loss of Sri Krishna. Just a final word here. The Yadavas, the clan of Lord Krishna, has just crumbled, and Sri Krishna himself has just died, just a few chapters before this. Clearly, we're coming to the end of the story. Great civilizations are collapsing. Hastinapur is okay, but here, the Dwaraka has just collapsed. In fact, it has sunk into the sea, according to the story. And Sri Krishna has died. So in the story, there's so much loss described at the end of this Mahabharata story. And we're just seeing part of it here. The loss of this great dynasty, the Yadava dynasty, and the loss of Sri Krishna. And as a result, Arjuna is extraordinarily depressed. When we meet next time, a little bit like Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, it was Sri Krishna who addressed a very depressed Arjuna and gave Arjuna the inner strength and spiritual teachings he needed to go on in life and fight the battle. Now, when we meet next time, we'll see Vyasa giving spiritual advice and encouragement to Arjuna, so Arjuna can know what to do next. And you might be very surprised at what Vyasa's advice is. We'll see that next Saturday. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.